To Engage 8, your daily 8 minutes of football news in the NFL, brought to you by the members of the Blitz podcast. It's trade deadline day, my guy, and we've had the craziest deadline in NFL history today. Let's do a little recap for you before we dive into some of the analysis, but some of the big deals to go on today. Calvin Ridley ends up in Jacksonville. Chase Claypool is headed to Chicago. Zach Moss was basically traded for Nyheim Hines. Willie Jackson's headed to Pittsburgh. Bradley Chubb headed to the Dolphins in a huge trade, including a first-round pick. Chase Edmonds also headed back to Denver in that trade from Miami. Jeff Wilson, he's headed to Miami. TJ Hawkinson, he's headed to the Vikings. So a lot of movement going on today, but we're kind of just going to keep it short and go with our winner and loser, and we'll break down the whole trade deadline on an episode tonight. But who you got as your winner of this year's trade deadline, my man?
I mean, this one came completely out of nowhere, and it's Calvin Ridley to Jacksonville. I haven't heard the name Calvin Ridley in like 2 months, and all of a sudden, poof, he just gets sent to Jacksonville. This was a move that I think, needed to make. Obviously, you're not going to get to see him until next year in Jacksonville because of the suspension. But we've seen them struggle so far. They're probably going to be picking in the top 10 again and would have been a candidate to be, picking one of those top wide receivers. And now I don't know if you really have to, at least, maybe you want to still, but you definitely don't have to. You've now got Christian Kirk. You just paid a lot. He can go back to a slot role, which is where he's thrived in the past. And then now you get Calvin Ridley to be your true X receiver. I mean, we see these first round packages that have been going for these A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. Calvin Ridley was borderline in that conversation before the whole suspension thing. And the max value of this package is a second and a fifth. It's all dependent on like his playing time and when he gets reinstated and if they extend him or not. He is a free agent after 2023, so they'll only get to see him for one season before having to make a decision on his contract. And he will be going into his year 30 season, but you do have an X receiver for Trevor Lawrence, and you don't have to give up premium draft capital to do so. So again, completely out of nowhere, like no rumblings of this whatsoever. But I think Jags and specifically Trevor Lawrence were the biggest winners today.
Sweet. Yeah. Real quick on the Falcons side, like you were talking about in the chat, how, on the surface, it looks like a really bad trade by Atlanta. But you got to remember this time, like before Calvin Ridley was suspended last year, he was taking mental health breaks from the team. He didn't even want to practice with the fellas. Like he didn't want to be anywhere close to the Atlanta Falcons organization. And then the whole thing happens with the betting, and obviously he's very upset with that. Like, there was a question whether or not he was ever going to play again in a Falcons uniform. So people kind of forget that, and they were able to get rid of him at this deadline. Definitely came out of nowhere, though, but a new weapon in Jacksonville for Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to do a little bit of an audible on my winner. I was going to say Jonathan Taylor and the Colts were my winner of the deadline because they shipped Nyheim Hines off. That basically just opens up Jonathan Taylor more and should open up the Colts offense more. But because they were basically forced to give it to Nyheim Hines because of their offensive coordinator, who is no longer their offensive coordinator. But my winner of the deadline today is Chase Claypool and the Chicago Bears, man. The more that I look at this trade, I'm so excited. I've always been a huge Chase Claypool guy, and the Bears, they had $120 million to spend in the offseason, but you look at the wide receivers, we were looking at them yesterday. Like, there's some big-name running backs available, but as far as wide receivers, where Chicago really needs to lock down, because David Montgomery's contract's up after this year, but you're pretty much set with Khalil Herbert. What you've seen out of him has been awesome. So you really needed help on that receiving side. So instead of going to guys like Allen Lazard in the offseason or Sterling Shepard, you go out, you make the trade for a guy like Chase Claypool, mini Megatron, we've always called him. So he did really well in the aging years of Big Ben. Had one really good season with Big Ben before he decided to fall off permanently as a quarterback. All due respect. But now he's got Justin Fields, who's looked phenomenal in these past few games. And I think the Chicago Bears are a force to be reckoned with on offense now a little bit. But that's my winner today, Chicago Bears and Chase Claypool. Who you got as your loser of the deadline, my man?
Yeah, before we get to my loser, I'm like right there with you. I love Chase Claypool. I'll probably be wearing his jersey on the pod tonight. And if we weren't trying to make this short, I probably would have had the Steelers as my winner just because they'd have two deals that I need to talk about. But biggest loser, I mean, you could name a lot of them because a lot of the names that we thought were going to get moved didn't. Like, Jerry Judy, Brandon Cooks, who is my biggest loser. He was like liking tweets about him getting traded, and it even was a tweet that came out from Ari Merov that said that the Texans and Brandon Cooks are working together to try and get a trade done today. It seemed like they were going to part ways no matter what. And then the deadline passes and nothing happens, and he's still in Houston. He puts out a tweet saying something along the lines of "playing with my career now. Now the games are over," or something like that. So it seems as if he's burned that bridge there in Houston, and he's got the remainder of this season and 2 more years left on his contract in Houston, who's probably going to be tanking for the number one pick now, especially that they, surprise, surprise, the Texans are out of the playoff race. They're going to be going for the number one pick, and Brandon Cooks is one of the oldest players on that roster and could have been competing for a Super Bowl with, Green Bay, Kansas City, one of these teams if he got moved, and he ultimately does not due to, I don't know if they were caught up on compensation or what it was, but he kind of got screwed over there, and now he's stuck in Houston, at least till this offseason.
Yeah, interesting situation going on in Houston for sure. What he tweeted out after the deadline did not seem like a happy football player to be playing under the Houston Texans, but see what happens, man. My loser for the deadline is the Green Bay Packers, man. Like, what the fuck are you doing? I don't understand at all how you don't go in on a wide receiver here. This was the time to do it. And Aaron Rodgers, he's got an opt-out option after every single year coming up. And I think he might just, with the way the Packers are playing right now and the very limited receiving options they have, I would not be surprised that Aaron Rodgers, being the guy that he is and the ego that he has, just retires midseason and calls it a day. And that would really change and shake things up for Green Bay. But I could definitely see it happening now that you didn't make any effort at all in the busiest NFL trade deadline of all time to go out and get a receiver when you were probably, out of all the teams in the NFL, the one that needed it the most by far. And I don't understand it at all. I think some firings may be coming soon in Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers probably headed out of town. This is the beginning of the end for Green Bay Packers. But that puts us at 8 minutes, man. So hell of a trade deadline. We'll be recapping it all on tonight's episode of the podcast. We'll have that out tomorrow, and then power rankings in a couple days. So we'll catch you on Engage 8 tomorrow. Check out the podcast tomorrow morning, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.